did. No questions asked, no hesitation, just instinct. That was how I had been raised, and it was how I raised my daughter Talia. We lived quietly in Asheville, North Carolina, where I worked in finance risk analysis spreadsheets long days behind a computer screen. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and after her father left when she was just 2 years old, it kept us afloat. I never remarried. I told myself I didn't have time, but the truth was, I never wanted to divide my loyalty. Everything I had, I gave to her. Talia was bright, imaginative, and full of energy. I cheered at every recital, stayed up late, helping with school projects, saved for her braces, and poured everything into giving her a stable life. When she went off to college in Chicago, I cried not from sadness, but from pride. She used to tell me, "One day, Mom, I'll take care of you. You'll never have to worry about late nights and spreadsheets again." I never expected her to keep that promise, but some small part of me held on to the words. They felt like a safety net. After graduation, Talia moved to Austin, chasing her dream of launching a wellness brand. At first, she just needed small amounts of help, $500 for rent, $700 for groceries, a little extra to cover startup costs. She always thanked me, always called, always made me feel like I was the best mom in the world. But when she turned 25, things took a turn. A partnership fell apart. Her lease jumped. Clients pulled out. I remember the exhaustion in her voice when she called. "Just until things stabilize, Mom. You don't have to, but it would help." That month, I sent her $3,000. I kept sending it every month after that. At the time, it didn't feel like a burden. I had no debt, no lavish expenses, and I believed in her. Supporting her dreams felt like a second chance to do something meaningful. For 3 years, I wired those transfers, faithfully believing I was helping her survive. But one evening, as I texted her about my upcoming visit, another message came through. It was from her number, but it wasn't meant for me. "The ATM just paid again. Tell Caleb to book the rooftop." My chest hollowed out. The timing was too precise, just minutes after my transfer went through. I called her immediately. She answered with a bright voice, laughing when I mentioned the strange text. "Oh, God, no. That was for Caleb. It's just a joke. He calls himself an ATM sometimes. Don't overthink it." She brushed it off so easily that I felt embarrassed for even asking. But deep down, unease took root. It was the first time I paused before sending money. When I finally visited her in Austin months later, I arrived with groceries and flowers, expecting a messy apartment and signs of struggle. Instead, the place gleamed. A designer couch, new throw pillows, luxury candles, and an espresso machine adorned her kitchen. Yet that evening, over wine, she sighed about barely scraping by, about Caleb's unstable job, about how exhausting it all was. Her words didn't match the polish around me. When I asked about the new furniture, she claimed everything was discounted or gifted, nothing serious. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me stiffened. The next morning, I saw a notification on her phone, a Venmo request from Caleb for your share of the Airbnb weekend. Just the night before, she had told me she'd canceled therapy because she couldn't afford the copay. My smile froze in place. Something was deliberately off. After that, the requests escalated. Her car rattled. I sent $800. Her dog had an emergency vet visit. I wired $1,000. Her laptop died. I transferred $1,200, skipping my own dental appointment. Each time she sounded panicked enough to make me reach for my phone. Each time I told myself it was temporary. But the emergencies never stopped. Meanwhile, I was crumbling. I ignored my own health until one afternoon I landed in urgent care with dangerously high blood pressure. The nurse told me to rest, to disconnect. I texted Talia, just wanting comfort. Hours later, she replied, "Oh no, that's terrible. Will the transfer still come today?" Her words hit me harder than the diagnosis, not long after she asked me to check a shared iCloud folder for work files. But when I opened it, I found screenshots of a group chat. The name read, Family Finance Squad. The members Talia, Caleb, and others I didn't recognize. I scrolled, heart pounding. The ATM just paid. Pool parties funded. She'll buy the dental excuse again. We should get her to cover Hawaii, tell her it's a wellness retreat. Talia chimed in too. She's too nice to ask questions. I sat frozen, hand over my mouth. It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't harmless venting. It was calculated, deliberate, mean. For years I had told myself the giving was love, but in their eyes I wasn't a mother. I was a bank account. I confronted her days later, showing her the screenshots. She didn't cry, didn't apologize, just shrugged. It was private. You're being dramatic. You said you wanted to help. Don't flip it now. My throat tightened. I told her I had canceled vacations, skipped appointments, worked myself into exhaustion for her. She rolled her eyes. You always make it about you. Something inside me broke, not loudly, but sharply. I walked out without another word, sat on the curb, and felt the sun on my face as a coldness settled in. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to send anything. The silence after that confrontation was louder than any fight we'd ever had. I didn't cry on the flight home. I didn't call a friend or pour out my heart in emails. I simply sat with the quiet, letting it seep into me like something I had forgotten existed. The next transfer date came, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't open my banking app. My hand hovered over the phone, shaking slightly, but I pressed the screen dark and laid it face down. The world didn't collapse. The sky didn't fall. Only silence followed, sharp, but strangely clean. Days later, Caleb emailed me directly. His words dripped with condescension. You're really going to cut her off like that? She's struggling. You're abandoning her again. Again. That word hit like a stone. Hadn't I carried her since the day her father drove away? Hadn't I sacrificed weekends, friends, my own health to keep her afloat? And yet in their story, I was now the villain, the selfish mother pulling the plug. I read the email twice, then closed it without replying. It was the first time I chose myself over defending my worth. Still, the space that opened in Talia's absence wasn't immediately comforting. It was hollow, echoing, like walking through an emptied house where your footsteps sound too loud. I caught myself reaching for my phone, expecting a request for rent, for groceries, for some crisis. But nothing came. No panicked calls, no hurried texts. And slowly I began to notice what filled the gaps. I left work at 5:00 p.m. instead of lingering to keep busy. I picked up a novel I hadn't touched in years. I called Marisol, my old friend, and we laughed for an hour about nothing. I even booked a weekend trip to Maine on a whim. A bed and breakfast by the water, just me, no itinerary. I walked the rocky coast in borrowed boots, drank coffee beside fogged windows, and for the first time in decades, I didn't check my email. I wasn't lonely. I was full. But even as I started to reclaim pieces of myself, the hurt lingered like a bruise. At therapy, I spilled everything, the years of transfers. The message calling me an ATM, the group chat that mocked me. My therapist listened quietly before saying, "What you're describing is financial abuse." The word landed like a gavel. Abuse. I had thought of it as disappointment, as ungratefulness, but abuse reframed it. It gave shape to a pain I had never dared name. Naming it gave me the strength to do something I hadn't imagined before. I printed out the screenshots, attached a list of every transfer, every emergency I'd covered. Not out of revenge, not to shame her, but to put the truth on paper. At the top of the final page, I wrote a single sentence that had been echoing in me since that day on her balcony. I was your mother, not your bank. And you were my child, not my creditor. I signed my name, sealed it in an envelope, and sent it certified mail. 2 days later, the tracking updated to delivered. She never responded. No text, no call, no email. At first, I checked my phone compulsively, waiting for an apology or even anger. But the silence stretched, and instead of breaking me, it settled like a strange kind of peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pulled back into the cycle of giving and erasing myself. Weeks became months. I started donating small amounts to a nonprofit that supported single mothers, women like me who had carried too much with too little recognition. It wasn't about guilt or obligation. It felt good, simple, and light. I planted flowers in my yard. I hosted Marisol for dinner and laughed until we were both crying. I remembered what it felt like to exist for myself, not just as a lifeline for someone else. A year passed. On my birthday, my living room filled with voices, neighbors' friends, even a young woman named Ava from down the street who brought me a lemon cake with both hands and a bright smile. "Happy birthday, Miss Marina," she said. The people gathered weren't bound by blood, but they showed up in every way that mattered. Over brunch, someone asked gently, "Do you regret how things ended?" I paused, looked around at the faces, the warmth, the tulips on the table, and answered honestly. Regret isn't the word. Rebirth is, and I meant it. I still thought of Talia. I still loved her. But I had stopped waiting for a version of her that might never exist. I had stopped offering pieces of myself as currency. I no longer felt I had to earn a place in someone else's life by erasing my own. The distance between Talia and me became permanent in ways I hadn't foreseen. I kept waiting for the day her number might light up my phone with something other than need. A simple, "How are you, Mom?" A memory shared, or even anger that at least acknowledged what had happened. But the silence endured. Months stacked on months until it became a rhythm of its own. A rhythm that no longer startled me when I woke up and found no messages waiting. At first, I wrestled with guilt. The habits of motherhood are hard to break. I found myself thinking, what if she really is struggling now? What if she's ashamed to reach out? My hand hovered over my banking app more than once, just to reassure myself I could still send money if she truly needed it. But then I would remember those messages in the group chat, the laughter at my expense, the way she had looked at me when confronted. Not remorseful, not even conflicted, just irritated that I had dared to pull the curtain back. That memory steadied me. It reminded me that boundaries weren't cruelty. They were survival. Instead of sending transfers, I began redirecting that impulse. I baked cookies for my elderly neighbor. I joined a local book club, something I'd always told myself I was too busy for. I even signed up for a weekend watercolor class, my brush shaky at first, but gradually steadier with each session. Small things, but they added up. They reminded me that life could be filled with more than transactions and crises. Still late at night, doubts crept in. Was I a bad mother for walking away? The word abandonment lingered in my mind, planted by Caleb's email, but my therapist's voice echoed back. You cannot be abandoned for refusing to be exploited. Those words became a mantra. I repeated them on the nights when loneliness pressed heavy. Then one evening, as I watered the small garden I had started in my backyard, a thought washed over me. I had spent so long defining myself through sacrifice that I had forgotten I was a person outside of motherhood. For nearly 3 decades, my worth had been tied to how much I could give, how well I could shield, how endlessly I could provide. Without that role, I had felt like nothing. But maybe this was my chance to learn I was enough as myself. It wasn't an easy lesson. There were days I ached for her days. I replayed memories of little Talia tugging at my necklace or whispering promises to take care of me one day. Those echoes hurt the most. They reminded me of what I thought we had, what I thought we could have still been. But healing didn't erase love. It only taught me to hold it differently, to love her from a distance, without giving her the power to hollow me out. A year into this new chapter, my circle of friends had grown in unexpected ways. My neighbor Ava started dropping by regularly, sometimes just to chat, sometimes to bring me small things she'd baked. Marisol coaxed me into joining her hiking group, and though my knees complained, my heart felt lighter on those trails than it had in years. Slowly, laughter returned to my life, not the forced laughter of making excuses for someone else's lies, but genuine laughter born from presence and connection. It dawned on me one afternoon, as I sat on the porch, tea in hand, that I hadn't thought about the next transfer in months. I hadn't calculated what I might have to cut from my own life to cover hers. My money was finally mine, but more importantly, so was my time. I was no longer living in a cycle of exhaustion where love was measured by how much I could bleed for it. Friends sometimes asked if I would ever reconcile with Talia. My answer became gentler over time. I don't know, I would say, but I've stopped waiting. The truth was, I still loved her, and I always would. But I had accepted that love without respect and boundaries is only fuel for abuse. And I had finally chosen to step out of that fire. The day I realized I was truly free came unexpectedly. I received a letter in the mail, not from Talia, but from the nonprofit I had quietly supported. They sent me a handwritten thank you card signed by several mothers whose lives had been touched. One wrote, "Your gift gave me a chance to breathe." I stared at those words for a long time. That was what I had always wanted, to give Talia breath ease, the chance to rise without fear. But she had chosen to use my giving differently, and now, by shifting where I placed that care, I could still give it to someone ready to receive it with gratitude instead of disdain. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No gnawing dread of an emergency call. No guilt over spending on myself. Just rest. Another spring arrived, soft and green, and with it a deeper calm that surprised me. I had learned to live without the constant pull of Talia's needs, but what startled me most was how the space she left behind became filled with life instead of emptiness. My mornings slowed into gentle rituals, coffee on the porch, a short walk before work, sometimes just standing in the yard to watch the light shift across the trees. For so many years, every spare second had been consumed by calculation, sacrifice, and anxiety over her next crisis. Now I was beginning to savor something I had almost forgotten existed: my own peace. That summer, I hosted a small gathering at my house. It wasn't planned with fanfare, just neighbors and a few friends bringing dishes to share. Someone laid fresh tulips on my table, Marisol showed up with homemade bread, and Sweet Ava, brought lemon cake again. My living room filled with voices that weren't asking for anything but presence. For the first time in decades, I realized I was surrounded by people who saw me as more than a resource. They saw me as Marina, a woman worth knowing simply for herself. During that brunch, a friend asked gently if I ever regretted how things had ended with Talia. The question lingered in the air, soft but sharp. I looked around the room at the laughter, at the warmth, at the community that had formed, not because I had drained myself to create it, but because I had allowed space for it to exist. Regret isn't the word, I said finally. Rebirth is. I could still feel Talia's absence like a tender scar. I thought of her often, the little girl who once curled against my chest, the teenager who promised to take care of me one day, even the young woman who dreamed so brightly of her wellness brand. I still loved her. That truth hadn't changed. But love no longer meant erasing myself. Love no longer meant accepting cruelty disguised as need. I had learned to let go of the version of her I once hoped for, and in doing so, I discovered the version of me I had nearly lost. The lesson was stark, but clear. Giving without boundaries is not love. It is erasure. I had spent years convincing myself that sacrifice was proof of devotion, that motherhood meant endless supply. But what I finally understood was that love requires respect, and respect cannot live where exploitation thrives. By reclaiming my limits, I hadn't abandoned Talia. I had finally stopped abandoning myself. In the quiet that followed, I built a life that was no longer measured in transactions. I read books that made me laugh out loud. I walked along rocky coastlines and let the wind remind me I was alive. I gave not out of obligation, not to buy love, but to causes and people who met my care with gratitude instead of contempt. And in return, I received something I never thought I'd have again: freedom. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: love is not measured by how much of yourself you can give away. True love honors boundaries. True love makes space for both people to breathe. If you find yourself giving until you vanish, remember, you are allowed to stop. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to choose yourself, and in doing so, you might just find a rebirth waiting on the other side. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story moved you or gave you something to think about, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, and let's continue the conversation together.